interestingly, we're just talking in the break with our next guest. We'll bring her in now, royal correspondent Sarah Hewson, who will talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing here on the screens as the Queen's coffin comes down from Balmoral. But interestingly, Sarah was just up in Scotland when the now Prime Minister Liz Truss was in Scotland, and you were there for all those ceremonies, and little did we know within a matter of hours we would lose the Queen.
And Peter, watching these pictures as the Queen's coffin makes its way from the Balmoral estate to Aberdeen, the journey that those two Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson on his way out and Liz Truss on her way in, made just on Tuesday of this week. Impossible to have imagined then that we would now be seeing the Queen making her final journey from the Balmoral estate. We saw that beautiful photograph of her standing there in the drawing room at Balmoral Castle, her beloved home. And I think there's a real poignancy to this. You can see from these beautiful images why she loved this land so much and why she was so loved. And as she drove through the village of Ballater, their nearest village, there the locals say that while the nation's mourning a monarch, they are mourning a neighbour. She'd grown up there. She'd been going there since she was a very, very young child. She popped to the shops. They say that she hung up the crown when she arrived at Balmoral. She swapped it for the headscarf and the tartan. And she was often not recognised by people on the estate. There's a huge amount of warmth for her there, somewhere where she could have a degree of freedom, of normality, the picnics, the barbecues with the Duke of Edinburgh, and this final journey with her daughter behind her in the car behind. Very poignant indeed.
This is the thing where, particularly with Princess Anne and the fact that she is travelling with her, but also when she ends up in places where the public is going to be able to come and walk by, there'll be representatives, again, of the family, of government. There's absolutely going to be a continuity of someone being with her through the whole journey. Will that spread around the family? She
will never be alone, and we saw those 6 gamekeepers, all of whom she will have known. She will have known all about their families. There was a very personal family-type relationship among those working for her at Balmoral and at the Palace of Holyrood House, where she will lie and rest tonight, very deliberately to allow those who have served her for so long to be able to pay their respects and say their goodbyes. But yes, Princess Anne following in the car. Now, she is an incredibly strong and stoic woman, but I think it would test anyone's resolve, that 6-hour journey, just having lost your mother. She will also be travelling on the plane back from Edinburgh to RAF Northolt here in London on Tuesday, when the coffin returns to be brought here to Buckingham Palace. And in Edinburgh tomorrow, when the coffin is moved to St Giles's Cathedral, we will see the King and members of the royal family hold a vigil there around the coffin, guarding their mother in one of her final resting places.
You talk, Sarah, about her love of Balmoral and the anonymity and the respite that it afforded her. There's lovely stories of her striding out across the countryside, walking with one of her gamekeepers, accosted by American tourists who wanted a photograph with the Queen's gamekeeper. Didn't appreciate, did they, who they were in the presence of?
No, and they said, they said, do you love this area? She said, I've been coming here for 80 years or something. And they said, wow, you must have met the Queen. And she said, well, no, but he has, pointing to her bodyguard, and they asked for the photograph with the bodyguard. And she chuckled as they walked away, and she said, I'd love to hear their reaction when they show it to their families back at home. And another time she popped to the shops, wearing her headscarf. Nobody recognised her, and somebody said, well, you do look rather like the Queen. And she said, oh, how reassuring.
This is the thing where you always think that that some of these stories about her interaction with normal people, they must have been so few and far between. But it seems very obviously, particularly that village that you were talking about and some of the villages that people are going to see on screen here, these were frequent interactions. They weren't just the odd moment at a particular ceremony, or I was lucky enough to see them at the balcony. What do you think was it about reaching out to normal people like that she seemed to enjoy so much?
I think it works both ways. So she was able to reach out to normal people, but there in Ballater, in Scotland, they were very protective of her and protective of her space. They wanted her to be a part of their community. They wanted her to feel like she belonged, that she was a neighbour. They respected that. She wasn't treated as the Queen there. She was treated as Elizabeth, who lived at the castle up the road. And that for her was very precious.
What's your expectations of King Charles and about the transition to a different type of person? We all know what he was as the Prince of Wales, but the sure-footedness, the change in the tone of his voice, the way he carries himself, and even walking out the front of those gates a couple of days ago, it was this entire new dimension to a person that we have known for 70 years.
It was a real gear shift, wasn't there?
You saw that he'd been saving that top gear, and even just walking around, you saw he was there, and it was quite easy.
Yeah, this is a man who was born to be king, but he looks like he was born to be king as well, doesn't he? And he has started as he means to go on. And what I thought was particularly important about that walkabout you described there was that he recognises the public need to be sharing that grief. They want to see the royal family at this moment. After the death of Diana, when the Queen was so heavily criticised for remaining at Balmoral, where she believed she was doing the right thing, protecting those young princes. But the royal family then recognised that there was a need for the nation to share in that moment of grief. They needed to be seen, they needed to be visible. And King Charles has recognised that walkabout that he conducted, greeting the crowds again last night, doing exactly the same thing on the Mall as he returned to Clarence House, spending so much time with people. This is a man with an awful lot on his plate, but he's giving the public his time. And he's also giving a bit more of himself. That speech that he gave, that address that he gave, very personal, showing his feelings.
Well, you get an expectation that because they're trying to keep part of these roads and the gates as working, literally so perhaps the king can come and go, that you have the people that once they have laid the flowers, they're starting to gather with a certain expectation that this could be a daily event, some interaction with the king.
Well, particularly after what we had yesterday, the scenes in Windsor, when we weren't expecting to see the Prince and Princess of Wales and the Sussexes. Yeah.
Well, let's just get your take on that. There was a rumour that at the gates at Windsor, we might see Prince William and Catherine, and we know now their family has relocated, I think, the last couple of weeks to live at Windsor. But of course, I was watching at home, and you could have blown me over when the Duke and Duchess of Sussex exited the same vehicle after months and months of what we're told is trouble between the two couples.
You were not alone in your reaction, Peter. I shared that. They were remarkable images. Now, our understanding is that Prince William, the Prince of Wales, reached out pretty late in the day, it seems, but invited Harry and Meghan to join them on that walkabout. And it was an incredibly important image for them to be showing that unity ahead of the funeral, because they will all be there in the funeral. And I think the king will have wanted that show of unity before that, so that didn't overshadow that moment for the Queen. Whether or not this is a lasting rapprochement or a temporary truce, I don't know.
Right, you're absolutely right. If it had been left to the day of the funeral,
what would we be talking
that would
about?
be the focus.
About a minute ago, there's a little bit of breaking news here from the police here in London, where their expectation is that every day, not cumulatively, but every single day that the Queen will lie in state, that 2 million people will be gathering in those lines, that will be there for 23 hours a day, for 3 days in a row. I read earlier reports that if 1 million people were all in one place at one time, the city would bust. The idea of 2 million gives an idea about the urgency, a very quiet, respectful, orderly urgency, but the urgency people feel to want to be part of this.
I was at home this morning before I came here. My children want to come down today. I thought, will they manage the queues? But it is a moment in history, once in a lifetime for most of us, to want to be a part of that. I mean, when you talk about 2 million people, it's hard to imagine how that is going to work. We've never seen the like of it before. The Queen Mother's funeral, the royal households didn't know what to expect. It had been a pretty difficult time for the royal family. She was very old. Would people want to come out and mark this moment? And there were hundreds of thousands of people queuing to sign those books of condolence, queuing to get into Westminster to see it, queues right back to Tower Bridge. That is nothing compared to what we are going to see over the course of the coming week. Just imagine what's going on behind the scenes in government departments now in order to facilitate the transport, the security operation as well.
Yeah, the infrastructure required. I mean, you see literally St John's ambulance that wasn't there 2 days ago is starting to pop up in places where people are going to be congregating in the next little while. Last one from us here, Sarah, which is your expectation of the next couple of days and the pace of things, because it feels like that there has been, rather than the one official thing each day, there's multiple things that are taking place. Does it start to calm down, that it becomes about lying in state is the thing that happens one day? It's not about a walkabout here and something else there, because it feels like this is playing out really at the speed of the 21st century, which is instant gratification and constantly changing.
It's interesting, Paul, isn't it? Because in grief, we go through various phases of mourning, and I think we're seeing that playing out. We had that immediate shock, that sense of mourning in the hours after the Queen's death. And yesterday, the mood shifted. It was more of a mood of celebration, 3 cheers for the new king. And then today, that first sight of the coffin, bringing it right back down to that very subdued, solemn mood, making it real. I think for many people, it hadn't quite seemed real. The sight of the Queen's coffin coming out of the Balmoral estate today will have made it very, very clear. There will be a lot of activity going on over the coming days as she moves to Edinburgh, and then as her body returns to London, to Buckingham Palace, and then to Westminster. Then the calm as she lies in state in Westminster, building up again to that funeral on Monday the 19th.
Sarah Hewson, thank you so much for your time.